A few weeks ago, on the 28th of September, we looked back at the beginning of the Norman invasion of England, 957 years to the day that it happened. And today, as promised, we're concluding that video with the legendary Battle of Hastings on its anniversary. Let's dive in and investigate what happened on the day that forever changed the course of English history. As mentioned in the previous video, William had arrived in Pevensey in Sussex on the 28th of September. Initially, Harold and the English army had been prepared and awaiting William by fortifying positions along the southern coast. However, trouble elsewhere forced Harold to ride north to confront another invading force, the armies of his brother Tostig and the King of Norway, Harald Hardrada. After beating the Norwegians at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, Harold rapidly rode south again to confront William, who by now had crossed the English Channel. On the dawn of the 14th of October, Harold arranged the English army in a strong defensive position occupying the top of a ridge. The English lines are thought to have stretched for about half a mile, with their flanks covered by woods and marshy terrain in front of them. Their formation was dense and tightly packed behind a shield wall which offered good protection from cavalry but little room for movement. William and the Normans were positioned to the south and would need to climb the ridge to have any chance of breaking through the English front lines. The Normans themselves were positioned in the centre, with Breton and French allies to the west and east. There is some debate about the size of the two armies, but rough estimates put them both between about 5,000 to 7,000 men, a likely assumption as the order of battle would show both armies were quite evenly matched. Shortly after 9 AM, the sound of war trumpets blared through the air, signalling the start of the battle. The English stayed firmly rooted behind the shield wall as the Normans unleashed a barrage of arrows. Due to the upward angle of the hill, the arrow attacks were unsuccessful and failed to do any damage. Over the following hours, the Normans are known to have utilised a trick-for-treat tactic at least twice to lure the English away from their stationary position. At times they were somewhat successful at making holes in the shield wall, but the English line held into the afternoon. William then sent spearmen forward to attack the shield wall, but they too failed and were repelled. Then, to make matters worse a little bit later, part of the Norman left flank began to panic and broke lines upon hearing rumours that their duke was dead. Some of the English pursued them downhill but were surrounded on a hillock and were neutralised. As we know, William was in fact not dead and had managed to hold his forces together after riding out in front of them and removing his helmet as proof. It's thought that he shouted at his men, "Look at me, I live, and with God's help, I shall conquer." Eventually, as daylight came to pass and after hours upon hours of furious and barbaric fighting, and with two of Harold's brothers dead, fate would turn on the king himself. There are two main accounts of how Harold may have died, with neither being known 100% for sure. The first and most famous is that Harold was killed after an arrow struck him in the eye. This cause of death comes from the possibility of being shown in the Bayeux Tapestry, but unfortunately we can only say possibly as there are two figures depicted under the inscription "Here King Harold has been killed," one of which is a figure with an arrow protruding from his eye and the second a fighter being hit with a sword. Therefore it is not completely known which is supposed to be Harold. The second is from an earlier source preceding the Bayeux Tapestry telling of the events, in which Harold is cut down by 4 Norman knights depicted in barbaric detail as: the first, cleaving his breast through the shield with his point, drenched the earth with a gushing torrent of blood. The second smote off his head below the protection of the helmet, and the third pierced the inwards of his belly with his lance. The fourth hewed off his thigh and bore away the severed limb. So, whether it was at the hands of the 4 knights, an arrow to the eye, cut down by a sword, or some other way, by the early evening of the 14th of October 1066, Harold, the last king of the Anglo-Saxons, was dead. Upon hearing the news, the English army broke apart and were ruthlessly hunted down by the Norman horsemen, finishing off any real resistance and ending the 9-hour battle for good. No other single event across the British Isles has led to such upheaval and profound societal change as did the Battle of Hastings. From the 14th of October onwards, things would never be the same again. After the victory, William marched on London and was crowned king on Christmas Day 1066, beginning the Norman rule of England and ending the Anglo-Saxon era for good. And whilst there were resistances and rebellions, some of which we'll cover in the future on this channel, none were able to remove William or the Normans from their positions of power. It looks as though William's famous words in the midst of battle as his men were retreating were correct. With God's help, he did indeed conquer. I hope you enjoyed watching today's video on one of history's most legendary battles and part 2 of the Norman invasion story. Thank you once again to all viewers and subscribers, and I'll see you next time.